Welcome back, everybody, to the Growing Pains podcast. And I'm so excited this episode to introduce you to Brittany Greenfield, who is the CEO and founder of Wabbi. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Oli.
Whenever I meet a woman in technology, I am very curious about, you know, how early in your life did you sort of begin a relationship with the technology industry?
It,
What was that impetus that
yeah,
got
it's
your interest?
it's a great question. For me, tech was dinner table conversation. My father happened to be in the industry, and so it was just normal for me. We'd talk about it. I remember hearing technical terms. There's actually a picture of me. I'm sure you and your audience has seen the really old IBM personal computers.
Oh, yeah,
Yep.
those
There's a picture.
monstrous.
Oh yeah, took up a dining table. And there's a picture of me sitting behind one when I'm just a baby. So I guess I never thought otherwise. I actually tried to not have the apple fall too far from the tree, and in college studied pharmacogenomics.
Oh, wow.
But at the end of the day, I kept coming back to really the technology of it and how technology drove innovation in new industries. So I was destined.
So, what were some of the early experiences and lessons from your father?
It's from
You
my
know,
dad. It was funny. I was very lucky with him. He always had a very diverse team that he worked with. So it never occurred to me that being a woman, I shouldn't go into technology. And I think I just really got to see it at a time that technology was coming of age, right? Nowadays,
yeah,
everybody wants to go work for a tech company, and every company is a tech company. But
yeah,
I just got to see, how technology really helped companies and people capture exponential gains.
yeah,
And to me, that was the problem that was interesting to solve, was how can we actually go maximize humans for what they're good at, interesting problem solving, by
yeah.
using technology to do all the other stuff. And that was really what I got into. And I got to see I think the other thing I got to see was all the different components of technology. I think a lot of times people go, oh, I'm in technology, therefore I must write code. I'm the first person to say I'm a technical person, I'm a technologist. I know better than to write code because that's a different art. And being
Right.
exposed to all of those technical roles that weren't necessarily writing code really allowed me to find my own role in tech.
Is there anything about your relationship with your father that inspires sort of your leadership style? Because, it is a challenge leading teams in the tech space.
It is for sure. And I think it's two things. One is the idea of an open door. I think part of the problems that startups struggle with nowadays and tech companies do is there's a little bit of deitization of the startup teams. And for my dad, he's just a normal guy, and he always had an open door policy, right? Come on in, say hi, tell me what you're thinking about. And how are you? And I think that goes both ways, not just for employees, but customers. How are you supposed to know how to improve if you don't know what's going on? And I'm sure a lot of us have worked for companies where it's very much a closed door policy,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
I don't want to hear it. Don't tell me the bad. So I think that's lesson number one. I think the second one is what I've termed practical transparency. I tell my team this all the time. Look, the reality is I can't be fully transparent with you about everything, right? We have a public company that's an investor in us. If I told you a lot of the mechanics, it might scare people, whatnot. But what I will do is I will fill you in. I will tell you the stories when the time is right. Because much like, the topics that you discuss here, it's really actually about the lessons you learn along the way, not what was it like to go edit a budget sheet. Right. And
right,
that's
right.
really, I will share the lesson. So I think that's the second thing, is sort of that practical transparency versus, again, what's become a buzzword. Oh my God, we're fully transparent. I think everybody remembers the story.
Yeah,
GitLab, when they went to go public, had to pull out all of their transparency because everything was documented on a wiki. That's also
yeah,
not productive, right? Like,
Right.
you need to curate the information, and it's not about limiting information. It's about making sure people have the most relevant current information, because especially in technology, in startups, things are changing quickly. So you don't want somebody referencing something from a year ago that has no relevance nowadays.
Oh yeah. So let's get to Wabbi. What tell our listeners what Wabbi is, what it does, and what was the problem you're you're still trying to solve or have solved or
Oh yeah.
working on.
It's I think that's the beauty of technology. We're always still aspiring to solve a new problem, even if it's an extension of the original. So
Yeah.
what we solve is how organizations build code more securely. Building software is a lot like building a house. You have a set of checks and balances, and sometimes it's, hey, can you just make sure the floor is level before we put tile on it? Other times it's full stop, where you have to have an inspector come in and check the wiring before you put up the drywall. Because if you put up the drywall and the wiring's bad, not only is that very unsafe, but also very expensive to fix. And Wabbi is part of that development tech stack, and we automate and orchestrate the security requirements in there. Right? Oh, you're dealing with personal data. You need to put a 15-minute timeout, because if somebody walks away from their computer, we don't want somebody else to be able to walk up and suddenly access it. And it gets very, very nuanced very quickly. And we were born out of this problem that, modern development moves so fast nowadays that security is a slightly different problem than just software testing, QA testing. It has, like I said, many nuances, a lot of different stakeholders involved. And we said we've got to find a way to translate security into development, and then development back into security. And that's what our software platform was built around, to say, without changing development's workflows or security's workflows, how can we better enable them to collaborate? And that's what we do. It's a ever growing, last year there were 26,000 new vulnerabilities found. And the more we use technology, that
Wow.
number is only going to keep growing.
Right.
So how do
Yeah.
we make sure companies focus on the foundation of their security?
So a lot of founders, uh, the problem was kind of personal. Like
Yeah.
what was it about either your background or what you were experiencing that made you think I'm going to do it, or I'm going to, or at least work with a team to do it?
So this is sort of what I've always actually done throughout my career. I talked about there being a lot of different technologist roles, and my specialty became identifying market opportunities, seeing where that pain was out there, and building the strategies and teams to go capture them. And I was working in what was known, I've always been in enterprise software. I was working in what's known as the endpoint space. So for folks that aren't as familiar with cyber, that's like antivirus on your computer as an example of an endpoint. And I was talking to our prospects, our customers, right, trying to figure out what that next big thing was. And everybody was really, really focused on building, taller walls and deeper moats and better sharks with laser beams. And I said, hold on one second. When 9 out of 10 breaches begin due to defects in code, why aren't we focusing on the code itself? And at the time, the term DevSecOps was becoming very prevalent. And so, like you said, right, it becomes personal for me, because I hate a problem that's not being solved. And as you know, with founders, you sort of, pick away at something and we can't walk away from it. And so that became my personal problem to come solve. And it's been a journey, a good one and a bad
Yes, yes. And we talk about growing pains. I'm sure there's been a lot of milestones and pivotal moments sort of in your journey to that first $1 million in ARR. Can you share any pivotal moments as you were building the product that you think might be impactful for our listeners?
Yeah, so I think especially for founders, it's something I like to talk about. That a pivotal moment was actually when I was just getting off the ground. I decided to launch the company without a product. Right. And this wasn't to do consulting or whatnot. And obviously we had a product. I knew what we needed to develop, but but what's harder? You have to understand the problem of your customers first. And I think this is actually where I had an advantage being somebody that said, I know better than to write code, right? I lack the art to do it. So I was going to have to hire somebody. I said, before I hire somebody, let me go back to basics. Let me talk to customers and whiteboard it out. And then I took it to wireframes. Okay, what are you expecting to have happen here? Then I took to interactive wireframes. Is this making sense? Are the workflows making sense? And that's, to me, that was the watershed decision really that I made that impacted us and allowed us to be really ahead of the curve in our market, because we actually listened to the problem and solved for the problem versus saying, oh, I have this idea about how we build it first. And I think that was the big one. The second one, is somewhere in the middle, right? Like all good things, somewhere in the middle. And, understanding that things are going to change, right? We were founded in 2018, so we had a lot of things change out of our control, right? But that was fine. And sometimes you get caught up in I'm trying to actually not pivot, right? There is a very well-defined problem space, whatnot. A lot of companies pivot, but you have to make sure that you're always beating the same direction, even if the current's changing. And sometimes that means changing over a team, right? And it's tough to let go. These are the people that were in the trenches with you, and realizing that your company's at a different maturity. It's all for the best, right? It's also for the best of the people that were there in a different time. And I think it's tough, right? As founders, these are our children, right? And it's tough to let go, but you have to do what's right for them. And sometimes that means moving different directions from the person
Yeah.
of an idea from a product perspective. And you can't be afraid of that, right? It's tough because you're dealing with so much other external uncertainty.
Yeah. Speaking of uncertainty and risk, um, do you have any experience with outsourcing engineering?
Yes, actually, great question. So for the first year, I said we didn't have a product for the first year, but
Mhm.
once we started product development, we actually outsourced our team because we knew we needed to get the product into hands of customers to identify who our customer profile was, and that was going to change who we hired, right? Because of technical requirements, because of maturity and understanding enterprise versus cloud native, et cetera. And so we worked with a great outsourcing team. And we worked with a great outsourcing team, and that was our first team. And they staffed it with a PM that could translate me into product and whatnot. And I think that was not just a cost-effective way, but a better way to build the first real team because we knew exactly what we needed. We also attracted better talent because we had a real product. We've also, as we've grown, so that was a dedicated outsourcing team. That was our engineering team. As we've grown, we've also worked with different outsourcing companies as well to supplement our engineering team. And, the guidance I'd give on this, not all, you have to find the right balance. And it's something that we're all struggling with this remote work and having distributed teams now, and it's fantastic. Not all of the best talent is in your backyard. So you can be creative, but you have to at least still hold them to the same standards. And we had some mixed results with some of the outsourcers that we went with. And so that is where, again, don't be afraid to say, look, this was a great experiment. We need to move on, because it's not fair to either person on either side of the equation, right? If somebody's not succeeding with you, there's someplace else they can succeed. It's not that they're a bad person or that you're a bad person for letting them go. So that's the big thing you do have to remember, that saying, well, this person is good enough for being an outsourcer. No, if they're not good enough as part of your team, because it also drags the team down.
Yeah, and how did you balance? I imagine a lot of things changed in a sort of during COVID and a post-COVID world in terms of just how do you scale your engineering team and what's your philosophy towards
Yeah.
outsourcing? How do you balance, in-house teams versus the outsourcing teams? How do you allocate which work? How have you come to sort of, how do you think about that currently? Is there anything that changed sort of in your arc of experience with outsourcing?
Yeah, so I'd say the two things with outsourcing. One, if you're going to outsource, obviously the first experience was purely my team, right? And that was a dedicated team and never felt like an outsourced team. So you got to have that same expectation as you balance having full-time employees with outsourced employees. Um, and and so one of the things we always said was they are not outsourced employees, they are employees. It's just a different staffing model,
Mm,
right? So you got
yeah,
to treat it exactly. And it goes to what I was just saying also, standards are the same. If they're not
yeah,
cutting it, right, they need to move on someplace else, right? It's not saying, oh, well, this is what I paid for, it's less. Nope. They either fit in the team or they don't, right? Cultural, you've got to interview them, just like you would interview other candidates and say, will this person fit in my team, right? Not just skill set, but culturally. And so I think that's the big lesson we learned, and that maybe we were giving some team member a little longer runway than we would have because they're outsourced, right? Hey, no, right, hold them to the exact same expectations because also culturally for your team and
yeah,
what outsourced one, they've got to recognize them as self, not as some folks that are living someplace else. And I do
yeah,
think, the world of remote work has opened up, especially for startups, much more flexible staffing models. We actually, not on the engineering side, but on a lot of our front of house and back of house operations side, leverage phenomenal flexible models, right? We have a military wife that runs our operations, right? And because she has to be able to move every 3 years and she has two little ones, right? She doesn't want a full 40 hours a week, but you know what? She crushes it in the time that
right,
she does, right? And so
right,
I've always said this about hiring, hire for outcomes.
yeah.
And then if you're hiring for outcomes, it makes it easier to absorb some of those flexible staffing models or outsourcing models or whatnot, because your expectations are the same for everybody.
Is there anything about outsourcing that has surprised you? I know from my perspective, sort of the initial stereotype was outsourcing was associated with particular countries.
Right.
Have you noticed or and had any surprises in terms of where you're seeing talent? Um,
You are seeing talent every place is the short version of it. There is great talent every place. And if you're willing to ask and ask for some help, you will find what that great talent pool is. And I think the big thing, and this was part of the staffing model side, you do a lot of times want to work through somebody else because you do have to understand some of the country implications.
yeah,
So that was sort of the surprise, like, oh, it's going to be actually a little more logistically harder, but there are companies that actually can help you do this. So it wasn't as hard. And that's it. But there's great talent every place, and it is worth it, especially as a startup. We bootstrapped for a lot of it. We have produced so much more versus some of our competitors that to get to the same initial revenue targets had raised 30, 40, $50 million. Like, nope, we did a lot with a little. And that counts a lot.
wow. Well, why don't we switch gears to a little bit on that topic? So the investment from Cisco and has probably been quite strategic. How do you view this partnership evolving, and what impact do you think it'll have on Wabbi's future?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've always said this, even long before I founded a company, right? Cisco's one of the best companies out there at fostering innovation in its ecosystem. And so it was really a privilege to have them come on board because they believed in this space. And I think what it has given us, having a strategic advice to future founders out there, every strategic is different. So know your strategic. Some of them, when they invest, they treat it more like a true VC fund. Others are aligned with what their internal goals are. Others are out there, and then everything in between, right? It's a short version of it. And so, I think that's the number one thing if you're thinking about a strategic for us, it's about access to what top of mind concerns are, right? And being able to tap in because they had a thesis in this space, which aligns with ours, that application security is all security, right? Because if you want somebody to configure a firewall, who's doing it? the developer. And so they aligned with us. So people go, oh, Cisco, networking, whatever. You're like, nope. The infrastructure layer and the application security layers have converged. So the being able to, whether it's in-house experts or their customer base, being able to tap into that and always just, really have that. I talked about it in terms of our product development. Always know what our customers, whether they're current or future, are thinking about helps us on our innovation. That's where a partner, and I'd say this for any investor, not just a strategic, a partner should be a partner, right? And make sure that they're bringing that value to you and saying, hey, can I I don't know how to tackle this problem. And it could be, I don't know how to tackle a hiring problem or an outsourcing problem. It could be, I don't know how to tackle a market problem.
Hmm.
And that's what an investor should really be, right? It's a partnership for a very real reason. Don't think one way or another, oh, I can't ever talk to them, right? They should always be the first person to pick up your call oh, when you need it. You should be able to have every conversation with them.
I like that. Speaking of partnerships, if I've interpreted some of the research on your background a little bit, you also talk about the partnership between DevOps teams and security teams.
Mm-hmm.
What's your philosophy on sort of fostering that collaboration?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that you can do is DevOps and security teams are actually very different. Right? If you think about, I used antivirus as an example earlier. If you think about your antivirus, it doesn't pop up and say, ooh, this is bad-ish. Would you maybe like me to stop this thing from attacking you? Right?
Yeah,
Security lives in this very binary world. It's the
right.
same
It's
reason we get
happening.
exactly. It's happening. It's stopping. You don't like this, call somebody later, right? Same with the home security system, right? The reason they live in that world is because if somebody does, and it's not if, it's when, right? That's the
Right,
reality we all understand now. When somebody
right.
breaches your perimeter, you want to know as fast as possible so you can stop them and minimize damage. And so they have to live in that very binary world. Versus in software, the dirty secret nobody ever talks about is that software is very imperfect, right? You're not getting app updates once a week because they're rolling out so many new features, right? It's because they've made an educated decision to say this is good enough for now and we can do other things later, right? Fix things later, other feature improvements later, whatnot. And so that's a very gray world. And one of the things that we did that differentiates us is to say we're not asking anybody to change, right? At the end of the day, humans are humans. Security professionals are great at being security professionals because of their mindset. Developers are great at being developers because of their mindset. So what can we do to empower them in their roles? And so that's really the problem we've solved. And I often say we're translating security into development and development back into security for that reason. And that's how we get them to collaborate rather than saying, it's like learning a foreign language, right? Okay, I'd like you to learn Russian now, right? It's a different language to them. You can't pick that up overnight, and nor should
Right.
they, because if developers were suddenly security experts, well, that's not their specialty, right? You can't make everybody an expert in everything. We have differentiation and specialty in jobs because somebody is very good at it and let them focus on what they're being very good at. And it comes to your very original question about, why I love technology. It's because technology empowers people to do what they are very good at.
Yeah. So does Wabbi integrate security into the coding?
It integrates it into what's called the software development lifecycle.
I
So
see.
it's not just the coding. Coding's one piece of that. You have coding, you have testing, you have release management, you have changes that happen to the code intentionally and
Mhm.
unintentionally. So there's this whole, I'm sure you've seen the infinity loop, right?
Yeah.
So we take the security process and integrate it into that infinity loop. So it's like a dance, right?
Yeah.
And there's times I talk about this all the time. I was talking with a QA engineer earlier, said, I rail on Facebook because they screwed up what DevOps means. DevOps is about efficiency, but Facebook popularized move fast and break things. You're like, no, 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 do not move fast and break things. Move efficiently and fix things at the
Right.
right time.
Right.
And
Right.
that's really what it is, because sometimes it's worth taking the pause today to avoid a lot of work in the future. And that's really what we're doing, because there's, just like for software, there's a development life cycle. For security, there's a life cycle in terms of how you manage it. Policies change all the time, right? Whatever tomorrow's big breach is going to cause every company to change their policies. It's not just compliance and regulation. Or applications change all the time. That could actually change the security requirements without anybody noticing it. That's really what we're doing. But yes, we're marrying those two processes, so that way, not to be, not to be all sort of foofy, but that way they
Yeah.
can live in harmony. But that's actually where our company name comes from.
Yeah.
It's the Japanese concept of wabi sabi, which says, let us accept the imperfection in the things that we create as a step towards enlightenment. Let's get the fact that the reality is code's not perfect, therefore you can't have security be perfect. And we're going to be fine. We're going to figure this out together.
Ah, okay. I like that philosophy because I'm sure from developers' perspective, they could choose to see um, sort of thinking about security as a hindrance as opposed, but in fact, it's actually, a sort of a necessary part of that harmony.
Exactly. And what happened was you had a lot of the early generations of tools, of DevSecOps tools that tried to do this. They overwhelmed the systems with a lot of data, right? And so developers said, this is a hindrance for me. I'm not a security expert, or I have 1,000 other things to do. Why does this have to be prioritized in my list? And and then same with security, right? We're getting all these requests and we don't know what to do. And so there
Yeah,
was too much data out there and no actionable information. And and that's where I use the example of, if I say I'm sitting here in Boston and it's 32 degrees, that's a warm day for me. And that's because I transformed the data of 32 into actionable insight. Versus if somebody's
mm.
sitting down in Mexico and I say 32 degrees, apocalypse, right? And that's where the
Touche.
connection, exactly, that's where the connection had failed to be made. And that's what we do differently, is we apply that context so people know what to do. The developers understand, this is why you have to fix this now, and by the way, if you fix this now, it will save you work on the tail end, right? It's going to prevent, this isn't just about preventing a breach, this is going to prevent a delivery delay, or just a ton of cleanup, right? We all got to do our chores. There's a lot of cleanup work when it comes to security and development too.
Right. So let's switch gears. And I know we've got short time, but I do want to give people the benefit of learning some insights from your career. So there's
Oh
also
yeah.
growing pains and career. Um, in researching you, I understand that you do have some insights around this idea of running from a job as towards
Yes.
to a job. I loved that, and I thought maybe you could share, you know, uh, maybe share a little bit from that experience.
It was there were a couple of things. One, you've got to be your own best advocate in a company, right? Remember, an employment relationship is a two-way street. Even an interview is a two-way street. And if you're not getting what you need out of it, it's not going to change. But you can talk about it, right? Relationships, personal and professional. If you don't tell somebody you're struggling with it, now once you inform them of that, it's up to them to see what they can come to the table. And that's what had happened for me. Was I'd been given a bunch of responsibility because I was opening up an international office, and then suddenly I was back in the day to day, right? And they weren't giving me that professional development chance, right? And they weren't taking it seriously. And so, I joke that the company I went to was the first boy to tell me I was pretty. And I went, you love me, right? I feel loved again, right? You're hearing me.
All right.
And I did. And I stopped for a second. I said, this is very different. And I was allured a little bit because it was different than what I'd done before. And then he said, no, 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 I love you. I have to have you. And, again, it goes back to that two-way street. If I wasn't going to get out of it what I needed to, oh, then I should never have gone there because, same I was talking about the outsourcers, right? It's not fair to me and it's not fair to them. And so it was a good lesson. I'm glad I had it when I had it. I've got to tell you, I know it's a tough market right now for people in jobs, a lot of layoffs. And I
Yeah,
can't tell you how many people I've talked to. They were like, oh, it's a blessing in disguise.
yeah,
And right, I wasn't enjoying my job. I wasn't getting what I wanted out of it. And the big thing I always say is that when you're going to make a career change, sit down, take that time with yourself. And it's not about being introspective, but what I actually did at the time, I left the second job without a job, and which was the best thing because it made sure getting that next job was my new job. But I had to think
right,
about what that next job was. And at the time, I went on monster.com and I just went through pages and pages of job descriptions. I like this, but not this, right? I don't like this. And here's sort of where I triangulate. I basically wrote my own job description, say this is what I am good at, what impassions me. You always have to do some things. Remember, you also have to do things that you may not
yeah,
love. But right,
yeah,
but here's what a job that is appealing to me that I will be successful at looks like. And to me that was I was lucky. It felt like much longer time than it was. But I was lucky to have that experience in my career because it really gave me the vocabulary to be able to talk about what I am good at and how I can help a company. And if I didn't get that early in my career, I don't know, right? I can't imagine being 2 decades into my career now having to really think about that for the first time.
yeah. I've really enjoyed meeting you, Brittany. I want to ask this question personally.
Yeah.
How do you balance being um, a businesswoman and the practicalities that are necessary there, and somebody that's interested in technology and also a founder in a space where there aren't a lot of women. And I don't know what's going on in your personal life, but how do you, how do you feel about the word balance? First of
I was
all,
actually just about to say, I love the fact that you use the word balance. First of all, we're all pragmatists. And I think that we all know there's no such thing as balance. It's an aspirational state like Walden Pond, right?
yeah,
But it's something good. And I think especially for founders or anybody, wherever they are in their career, if you don't think about it, you're never going to do the things that will help you get some semblance of it. And I
mm,
learned this the hard way when I was first starting the company, right? As part of this glamorization of startup life, everybody goes, "Oh, you're working 24 hours a day on it." And the reality is you're working 24 hours a day on it because your brain's going on it 24 hours a day. But if you do not take the time to do the things that are meaningful to you, you will actually not be the best person for your company, whether you're a
mm,
founder or an entrepreneur or, just getting your career started. You still have to satisfy all the other things that make you you, because that's how you show up at work. And if you don't do that, right, you're not going to be giving anybody in your personal or professional life the best version of you. And everybody deserves that, including you. And that's, I'm glad you use that word balance because you're not going to, nobody's ever going to get there. But if you
yeah,
don't think about it, you are going to fall. You may never achieve balance, but you can certainly achieve imbalance. And,
right,
I think that's where, and, talking about women in technology, right? You have a massive dropout of women in technology by the age 35.
yeah,
And part of it is it's pressure we put on ourselves, maybe external pressure as well. There's a lot of dynamics. It's a whole other podcast for us to chat on. But right, there is no doubt in my mind, and I have had friends that have gone through this transition. They finally go, out, right? Like you
yeah,
get to that place of imbalance where there is no coming back up from the other side of that
yeah,
seat.
tapping out.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for all the nuggets. I really, really appreciate it. Brittany, it was wonderful hearing about Wabbi and also hearing about your career. And it's just amazing to see a woman crushing it
Oh,
in the
thank you.
technology and security space.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. We need those gold stars sometimes too. So it's such a pleasure to have the chance to talk with somebody like you. And that's really, preaching the good word of the fact that this is not easy, but it is worth it. The journey is worth it. And entrepreneurship comes in so many different shapes and sizes. It's not just being a founder, it's pursuing a career that you want, that you love, right? And going and taking chances on. So I love that you're doing this, and it's been such a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you. And there you have it, folks. That's another episode of Growing Pains in the Bag. See you next time.